It's so spooky. It's just so spooky. Welcome back to Off the Bench, everybody. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson, and we are just going to keep the spooky music rocking for the entirety of October, I think. I feel like that's the way to go. Why not?
I'm willing to pay the royalties for the Monster Mash if you wanted to throw that in at the beginning next week. I will personally pay for the royalty. Who even wrote the Monster Mash? Oh, it was Bobby Pickett. Okay, yeah. I think he's dead, but I will pay him for that.
Of course you're familiar with who wrote it. Yeah, I mean, look, I think we'd probably get away with it. Look, we're getting a decent little following here on the pod, but not enough to get copyrighted by the Monster Mash, I don't think. YouTube's auto copyright system may rail us, though, so you never know. I don't want to speak too soon and be incorrect on that front. But, hey, you never know. Guys, in the chat, let us know if there's any audio discrepancies. We've been high, we've been low, we've been all everywhere in between as far as volume goes, so I just want to make sure you can hear Pat and I relatively equally here on this yonder podcast today, and if not, I'll just kill him. I think I'm coming back to Connecticut in a couple days, so I could just find Pat and kill him if I really needed to. But
in person,
if not,
incoming.
Hey, don't tease the people. So far, so good today. All right, good. Hell yeah, Gandhi, you're our official audio technician from the chat. So I trust you.
Gandhi's got to have been at all of these.
I know. So he's loyal. He's good. All right, let's get into it then, Pat. This was a low scoring ass week. This was gross. It felt like basically everyone other than Raheem Mostert didn't score any points. It was just there were obviously good performances. You had receivers like Tyreek Hill, like Cooper Kupp. Guys had their normal performances, but overall, if you look at the fantasy scores around your league, odds are you were looking at some season lows in terms of team outputs, myself very much included. But just to put this in perspective, these are the average points per game through the first 6 weeks, like points scored in NFL games. So we had 49.8 in week 1. 44.1 in week 2, then 43.6, 41.0, 45.0, and then in week 6, 36.7 points per game. That's because all those totals you saw that were like 20 to 17 or like 19 to 16 or whatever the fuck was going on in the league this week. It was gross, brought the average way down, made fantasy football disgusting, and Pat, I know, made our league gross. Just to jump into my matchup real quick to give you guys an update. Through nothing short of a miracle, I remain undefeated at 6-0 by winning 75 to 72. It was bad. It was bad. I won't lie. I should not be undefeated. I should realistically be, I would say, 4-2 based on how my team has performed. 6-0 is unreasonable. And this week was just, I held on by that much. Pat, I went into Monday Night Football, or was it Sunday? Sunday Night Football, sorry. The Giants game. I faced Darren Waller. I was up by 4 or so in the waning moments of that game, and then they're just chucking to him in the end zone repeatedly. I was like, I'm going to have a stroke. I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to have a medical emergency if they throw to this man in the end zone one more time. Thankfully for me, who are they even? The Bills defense committed just penalty after penalty to prevent Darren Waller from scoring.
He was not catching a touchdown if they had any say over it.
No, I mean, the first one was called, the second one was not, but look, I escaped unscathed somehow. Pat, how did the week go for you?
Bad. Outside of Tyreek Hill, I believe I only had 3 double-digit scorers, and one of them was Trevor Lawrence, who just sucks, man. He's the epitome. That's one of my bigger complaints about fantasy basketball and fantasy baseball is that I feel like there are players who are good real life players but not good fantasy players. That's been Trevor Lawrence this year, because by all means he's been a really solid quarterback and that team's playing well. But I don't know, the dude every week is just 15 points, which it could be worse. But you're trying to win these games. You want closer to 20 consistently, and there's no reason for output. But just a really really ugly week. I've been brutal at defenses this year, and I'm also a Jake Moody owner. So but I stood no chance.
Yeah, that one didn't go great.
Going into last night, I needed CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, and Brandon Aubrey to combine for less than 5. It didn't happen. I believe they had about 50. So
Yeah,
but it was
that
gross.
would have been a tough ask.
I was actually the highest scorer in one league, though. I dropped 160 full PPR, but I had Raheem Mostert. So, like, of course.
That'll do that,
like, of course that's going to happen. So, but yeah, tough week. My team is, on paper, so good. So good. But again, if you don't win, it means nothing. And very boom bust. Like, there are going to be weeks where I'm scoring 150 points, and there are going to be weeks where I'm scoring 70, but I just need to find a way to win a few more here. So, but, and have you checked the available quarterbacks in our league?
I sort of, because I had to pick up Jordan Love as like kind of an so once I'm a Justin Fields owner for those that don't recall, and he got hurt, and Jordan Love though was on bye this week, so he was just free to pick up anytime I wanted throughout Sunday. So I did so knowing that he would face the Broncos, not knowing what would happen to Justin Fields. Yes, Pat, I do recall that. I do recall that outside of Jordan Love, it was pretty gross. We were looking at Tyrod Taylor and maybe like Geno Smith at best.
Well, let's just
it wasn't
put it this
pretty.
way. If Trevor Lawrence doesn't play this week, I'm going to pick up Derek Carr, which is just should be considered like cruel and unusual punishment.
At least you could bust out the jersey.
I could bust out the jersey, but I'm hoping Trevor play practice today. I'm hoping he plays. I'm not starting fucking CJ Beathard or CJ Beathard, as some would like to say. But
the Beathard. We love Beathard.
Like the waivers are actually not terrible this week, as we'll talk about. And I looked in all of my leagues, and there was at least 2 or 3 compelling options. But at quarterback, good Lord, like.
Yeah, quarterback has been tough. And yeah, Pat, as far as your team is very good. But look, we've had teams throughout the history of our league that I can just remember being like, thanking my lucky stars they didn't find their way into the playoffs, because if they did, they would have tortured me and everybody else in the playoffs. And you just got to hope your team does not end up being one of those. I remember years back, I believe it was Brett, who may or may not be listening right now, had the combo of Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara the year that they were nasty, and somehow he just didn't make the playoffs with them. And if he had, I believe he would have gone on a run, or at least been quite a pain in the ass. So, yeah, look, in a league where only 4 teams make playoffs out of 12, that can happen. So you're currently out of the playoff picture. You're only a game back, though, so who cares? Yeah. But yeah, a lot of game left to be played. Pat sitting at 3-3. I'm sitting at a admittedly semi-fraudulent 6-0. But we
Vikings
continue
of our fantasy football.
Oh, no, I am not the Vikings. Fuck you. I'm better than the Vikings. I'm better than the Vikings. That is ridiculous. The Vikings were complete frauds, and we knew it. I'm still. Hold on. Let me see what I am in terms of scoring.
Got a good team, at least.
I'll say this: my points allowed or points against, whatever, are by far lowest in the league. But my points for, I think I'm 3rd in the league in points scored. So we're not looking at fraudulent. We're just looking at I should probably be 4-2 like the other team sitting there. So. All right, whatever. I'll let it happen. Okay, let's get into some of the news from this week. First and foremost, before we get into the news that is all basically guys that got hurt and what the fuck to do about it, like we talked about last week, let's talk about friend of the pod and friend of the show, Austin Ekeler, made his return this week. Great to see. Look, the production was definitely modest. I believe it was something like 12 carries for 29 yards and added about 30 yards receiving, but the touches were exactly what you want to see if you're an Ekeler owner. There was really no level of easing him back in. I mean, he had 18 touches, which is honestly probably a little less than what he would average, I would guess. But this is not a Jonathan Taylor easing him in situation where he was going to get 5-6 touches and Josh Kelly's going to do most of the work. Austin Ekeler back to full workload. I'm sure he will look better and better as the weeks go along. And yeah, just a guy that you are thrilled to own regardless.
I was insufferable last night. I was talking to some friends on Discord, and I was not watching the game because I lost. All my matchups were decided, and I was watching baseball. Sorry. But I was like, my friend would be like, "Oh, Ekeler just had a good run." I'd be like, "Who?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, who?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Oh, are you talking about noted off the bench guest Austin Ekeler?" And like, they thought it was hysterical, but after the 4th time or so, they I don't think it was jiving quite as well. But yeah, that was
you beating a joke into the ground. I don't believe it.
I can't imagine that. That was the bit of the night last night. So if you speak to me at all and mention Austin Ekeler, just be prepared. Just be prepared.
Real Coke taste. All right, I'll just go with more of the inside jokes that none of our viewers are understand. Okay, Austin Ekeler, obviously one of the biggest running back names in fantasy football, Pat, but arguably the biggest running back name in fantasy football is Christian McCaffrey, and he spearheads this segment that I need to open in the official way.
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy, and this is what's happening in your world tonight.
Kicking off our news and notes segment because Christian McCaffrey is hurt. He has an oblique injury. Also, they mentioned rib in there as well. Could be anywhere from 0 to 4 weeks, Pat, as you have noted here. And look, if you're a McCaffrey owner, it's just wait and see. It's sort of pain. I mean, you can't really predict how this is going to go. McCaffrey's obviously had his fair share of injuries pop up throughout his career, but that's what's going to happen when you have a guy who touches the ball 30 times a game. He's going to get hurt occasionally, but it doesn't seem like it's too major. The question is what do you do in response, right? You've got Jordan Mason, you've got Elijah Mitchell. Jordan Mason has looked good in recent weeks. Elijah Mitchell seems to be the incumbent sort of backup and replacement. Pat, what do you think the answer will be here between these two?
I mean, I do think they will both be involved. If I need a 49ers running back, I'm taking Elijah Mitchell. It's just clear that Kyle Shanahan loves the guy to a point last year where he was getting double-digit touches with Christian McCaffrey. Like, there were talks going into the preseason here, like people fading Christian McCaffrey. I don't know, like fading him to like the 4th pick. And part of that was because of the volume Elijah Mitchell had last year and that taking away from McCaffrey. Obviously, that didn't happen to start the year, and then Mitchell had his own knee injury, which it still seems like he's getting eased back in. The only thing is, like, is he still going to keep getting eased back in next week or so? But we have seen him perform really well in a Kyle Shanahan offense. So, but the only concern, though, is that going to happen this week? Like, is it going to be him, or is this going to be a really, really nasty committee? But in this 49ers offense, I feel like that could play.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, there's definitely room for more than one running back to succeed. Kyle Shanahan was asked if he would be okay with Jordan Mason being the top running back if McCaffrey's out. He said, yeah, we'll see. Elijah's earned a ton with us over these years. I think Elijah, when he's been healthy, has been as good of a back as there is. I think they're both basically probably flex plays if you're looking at it. I don't know if you can... I don't know that I feel confident this is going to be one guy getting a ton of touches over the other, like either way. Like even if Elijah Mitchell's fully healthy, I find it hard to believe that he would be getting 15 plus touches when Jordan Mason has looked so good as a supplementary back in this backfield. So I think both guys will probably get their touches. If I had to pick one, I would pick Elijah Mitchell, assuming he is cleared to go, just because he's been the guy for so long as the backup. I just don't know if I'm ready to admit that, Jordan Mason is going to kind of just jump him. I mean, we'll get into it in a couple minutes, but like this is almost the Emari DeMercado, Keontae Ingram situation where you've got one guy who... Yeah, I know. You've got one guy being Ingram who is, listed as the backup the whole time, but was hurt, so he missed time, and people weren't sure what was going to happen when he got back. Ultimately, the guy who was listed as the backup all year got most of the touches, and not DeMercado. So feels like that could be an apt comparison here. But again, both of those guys got work. I think both of these guys could get work, and this is a much better offense than the Cardinals, so it could be more productive work.
Yeah, they're not my favorite. Neither of them are my favorite pickup in terms of playing this week, just because I don't know which one's going to emerge. There could very well be one of them emerging, but it's just a guessing game and using a high waiver claim. I guess kind of jumping into the next guy here, I think maybe I'd prefer like a Rams running back as opposed to a 49ers running back in this coming week specifically.
I will say, Pat, the Rams running back situation is
bad.
Questionable. We will say that much. So we'll start here with the Rams running back situation. I just want to say that the fact that I do not have Zach Evans in 1 week where he is potentially going to be relevant gives me so much pain. Last week I talked about how I dropped Emari DeMercado at an inopportune time because, of course, he became relevant a mere hours after I dropped him when James Conner got hurt. Zach Evans,
7 days.
He did. He also became irrelevant in not a shorter time, but almost. And Zach Evans, look, I can't be expected to hold on to a guy who is not getting any work and was inactive for weeks and would not be relevant if it weren't for 2 injuries in front of him. But there were 2 injuries in front of him. So as of right now, it appears Zach Evans is the Rams back you would want to own over Royce Freeman, who is going to be one of the backs there. But Pat, there has been even more movement in this backfield as they brought in old pal Darrell Henderson into the mix here.
Well, he's just on the practice squad. Just on the practice squad, but they did also pick up Myles Gaskin from Minnesota's practice squad. So just a whole lot of mid here. In theory, I want to say Zach Evans because Sean McVay, it is clear that he does not have a problem with one guy getting literally every touch, every snap, whether it's been Kyren Williams this year or Cam Akers at the end of last year or Todd Gurley, going back a few years ago. He doesn't care, but it's have any of these guys really earned, getting the green light? I mean, obviously they've liked Evans enough to have him active the last few weeks. But again, they had Royce Freeman active over him, the first 2-3 weeks of the year. I'm not sold on the Rams running backs either. Again, one of these guys could emerge. It also depends on Kyren Williams' status and Ronnie Rivers, because I think once Ronnie Rivers comes back, he would clearly be, the lead back in Williams' absence. But it's another situation that I think is going to be really ugly, just mostly because it's either ugly players or guys that haven't had the opportunity to prove himself, like Zach Evans. So I guess I'm fortunate that in most of my leagues I don't have to really worry, look to the waiver wire to start a guy this week. But these first two backfields and the next one we're going to talk about too are just really ugly.
Yeah, so let's break down the Rams backfield here a little bit. So first of all, Ronnie Rivers was diagnosed apparently with a grade 3 PCL sprain, which is likely to keep him out for 4 to 5 weeks. So he's out a bit.
Seems more of a given.
That seems like more of a longer-term thing here, especially for fantasy purposes, because that'll basically take you through almost the end of the fantasy regular season if he misses the higher end of that. And then you've got Kyren Williams, who it's a shorter timetable as of now, we believe, but he has a history of ankle injuries, Kyren Williams does. So it's something that could potentially linger. It could pop back up. I mean, look, if you're really trying to parse through this mess of practice squad Darrell Henderson and practice squad Myles Gaskin and then active roster Royce Freeman and active roster Zach Evans, there's no way really to feel good about starting any of these guys this week. If you're going to take a stab, and Pat, stop me if you've heard this one before, it's Zach Evans. I mean, if you have to take a stab.
If you have to start one of them, you're starting Zach Evans. But I just don't be disappointed, if he gets whatever.
Understand what
8
understand what you're getting
Freeman,
into.
7 to Myles Gaskin's 3. This could be like the Rams backfield last year, basically, when it was Kyren Williams and Ronnie Rivers and Malcolm Brown. Was that last year? I don't know, but there was a point last year where it was really ugly.
I'm sure.
Before Akers kind of started playing again. So I feel like we could see that again here because I like I said, I don't think that any of these guys have earned getting that huge workload the way Akers did in the past and the way Kyren Williams has this year.
Yeah, understand what you're getting into regardless. But again, Kyren Williams having this be an injury that he's dealt with in the past, there's a world where, and maybe this is my Zach Evans optimism, even though I have no shares of him at the moment, there's a world where Zach Evans is the lead back for, several other weeks down the stretch, whether they're consecutively or not, I don't know. But it's just you got to kind of dig through this backfield and put together the pieces and figure out who's the best bet to, hope to emerge as a longer-term piece. And I think that is Zach Evans. I can't imagine a world where Myles Gaskin becomes their go-to guy or Royce Freeman. Darrell Henderson, honestly, probably has the best chance because he's been their go-to guy most recently out of anybody on this roster. But he would have probably been on the team if they liked him more than anybody they already had. So Zach Evans probably the best bet, but still none of them super exciting as far as this week goes. Pat, next up, we've got a guy, pretty close to your heart, David Montgomery, kind of a key cog of your zero RB build. Key cog of the zero RB strat for Pat, because Pat got David Montgomery and Isaiah Pacheco, which just honestly is zero RB wet dream there. But David Montgomery, rib injury.
Jonathan Taylor as well, too. Don't forget that.
Right. Montgomery's got a rib injury, likely to miss time, probably a multi-week thing, which leaves Craig Reynolds, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Zonovan Knight in the mix. But all three of them have their own question marks. Craig Reynolds, didn't look super impressive.
Looked
Jahmyr
awful.
Gibbs, I mean, I think you feel probably maybe better about Jahmyr Gibbs out of all of them because it seems like he's trending toward coming back this week. But again, he hasn't shown anything this year either.
And Dan Campbell
Nothing
hasn't
exciting.
shown a willingness to use him as a traditional, early down running back. Even the week Montgomery missed, there was a lot of Craig Reynolds. There was a lot of Bam Knight there. It was not the Jahmyr Gibbs show. I mean, granted, he got more touches than usual as we, what makes sense. And I think we could see that. But, again, if you're looking for, like, the Jahmyr Gibbs outburst, like, yeah, now would be the time if Montgomery misses 2 or 3 weeks. But is Dan Campbell even going to let that happen? Is he even going to give him the chance to kind of – we know, like, he's not going to take that job. Like, David Montgomery comes back and he's going to retain his role. Like, he's been really good, and they love those guys. They're not even, like, I almost said, like, fat guys like David Montgomery and Jamal Williams. They're not, but they're just these big bruising runners who are just fantastic in these short yardage situations. Dan Campbell loves those guys. David Montgomery is going to get his role back, but when that's what leads me to believe that Gibbs isn't really going to morph into that role too much. Honestly, if in PPR, you're going to start Jahmyr Gibbs if he plays. You're going to start Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm not touching Craig Reynolds. Again, I picked him up. I claimed him the last time David Montgomery missed a week. And I'm not touching Bam Knight either. This might be the ugliest of the 3 backfields, honestly, just in terms of how it's gonna work out.
Yeah, I'm not excited about really any of them. Again, though, to give some level of advice, I would just say Craig Reynolds is the one you're going to pick. If you're going to pick any off the waiver wire, he is going to step into that lead back role, whatever that means, with it being him doing it and not David Montgomery. Like, I'm sure it's not going to be Montgomery's 25-plus touches that he has been seeing regularly. So Craig Reynolds is the guy if you are just, need a warm body, which, Pat, honestly, a lot of people probably do with all the buys going on this week. I could use any sort of warm body. There's going to be a lot of
guys starting Craig Reynolds and Zach Evans and Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell because with all the injuries and bye weeks, like this same shit happens every year.
I mean, of course, Craig Reynolds is already owned in our league because our league is a bunch of piranhas about some of these running backs. But he'd be a guy. Yeah, Austin picked him up before kickoff last week. Yep. Genius. So Austin's got Craig Reynolds. Like that's a guy I would have scooped to be my RB2 this week. Instead, I am just starting double Buffalo Bills as of right now with James Cook and Latavius Murray. So that's going to be fun. Stay tuned for that. It's against the Patriots, so it might just be a blowout, and they'll be able to touch the ball a lot.
Like crazy.
Yeah, and look, after watching the Bills last week, Latavius Murray, I don't have the snap counts in front of me, but it sure seemed like he was on the field more than James Cook. I know he was on the field to start the game, so it's not as defined as I hoped it would be in James Cook's favor. I guess I'm just happy I have Latavius Murray at this point. Pat, keeping it rolling with the injury issues, you mentioned Trevor Lawrence.
Oh, I was going to say, I guess that's a good time to just mention Damian Harris and his injury. Obviously, he didn't have a ton of standalone value, but that does open up more room for James Cook. But as you pointed out on our little show sheet, that this is probably more of a Latavius Murray's going to get more work, which just sucks. Man. Guy's old. Let James Cook. Let this happen.
I would love to let James cook. I don't expect it. It's so frustrating. I know he's not as good in pass pro, and I know all this stuff, but geriatric ass Latavius Murray does not need to be on that field. Every time James Cook touches the ball, it goes for 5 yards or more. I don't care about, and I understand this is why I don't have a job in the NFL. I don't care about the pass protecting to that degree that he needs to be off the field that goddamn much. I feel like there's a better balance to be struck there, or a balance where they're both on the field. I don't know what it is, but James Cook is too much of a weapon to be off the field as often as he is, because he still Pat racks up 70 plus yards, even though it feels like I never see the guy touching the ball because he's just that efficient with his touches. But moving on with the injuries, Pat, you mentioned Trevor Lawrence before, your boy. Day-to-day with the knee injury. Seems like he's trending toward playing. He was seen at practice with a knee brace, but I would fully expect him to play this week. It's a tough matchup, so I feel honestly a little better about the Saints defense as opposed to anything.
Yeah, short week. Like I said, a guy who hasn't necessarily been performing, I guess, at least up to expectation. I would guess he plays, and like I said, our waiver wires to the point where it's like Derek Carr, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, guys like that. if Trevor Lawrence plays, I'm going to start him in that situation. But, like, if you have a better option, if you have a guy like Jared Goff, for example, I'm starting Jared Goff. Oh, I would start Jared Goff over Trevor Lawrence. But, and again, in a lot of these situations, you may not have the better option. So, honestly, at this point, like, I'm going to be really happy if he has one of his signature 15-point games. That'll be just fine with me based on just based on the injury.
Yeah, no, that would be plenty. There again with the bye weeks too. I wanted to pull up how many teams were on bye this week. All I know is that Jordan Love, because I've obviously been keeping tabs on him since he's my starting quarterback this week. He was listed on ESPN as the number 9 starting quarterback this week, just by virtue of all the fucking guys on bye. So Trevor Lawrence may still be a higher tier option even against a tough defense like this.
I'm looking at the rankings right now. The fine folks at ESPN Fantasy.
Yeah, I know that there's so many. This must be bye Mageddon, right? There's always the one bye week where it's just like it feels like every team in the NFL is just not fucking playing.
I don't think I have any byes this week on my team. I don't.
Oh God, you are.
I think DJ.
You
Shark,
are very lucky then.
I think DJ Shark, who I was probably going to drop, it was the only guy on my team on bye this week.
Oh my God. Okay, hold on, let me
no,
see
they've
how many
actually
teams
got
are on
Lawrence
bye.
ranked 16th. Jeez.
Wow. Okay. Jesus, that's kind of rude.
The more I think about
week 7. Let's see the quarterbacks on bye. I guess there's not really impact quarterbacks. Yeah, you're gonna go with Geno. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. The quarterbacks on bye this week aren't anything special. I mean, it's you've got Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott and C.J. Stroud as, like, I guess, viable starting quarterbacks, but then it's Zach Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, and Bryce Young. So we're not looking at a ton of guys, but look, sometimes you're just down bad at quarterback. It can happen. So Trevor Lawrence, you may be down bad if you have Trevor Lawrence, so based on what he's been doing and now going against the Saints. Look, I'll be hoping for Calvin Ridley to pop off, so maybe we can work out a deal here,
Sam
Pat. Both our guys
can available in our league.
No, Sam Howell has been Sal's starter basically all year.
Let's just put it this way. There are 9 projected starting quarterbacks available in our league. So what that means, I can't do math, 23 starting quarterbacks are owned in a 12-man league. That is insane.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah. Our league is a bunch of vultures. So
and you know who the lowest ranked guy available is for projections? Mr. McCorkle Jones.
Yeah, I know. He's projected for like 10 because it's just gross. I can't talk about Mac Jones anymore on this show, Pat. I'm going to have a heat stroke.
Wait, though. Wait, I was really busy on Sunday. Did the Patriots win? Wait, who did they play?
Pat, I'm in pain, okay? I'm in so much pain. I'm in all of the pain. I cannot fathom how quickly things turned around because I was so optimistic for Mac and this team after the first couple weeks. I was like, we look pretty good. Mac looks good. He looks confident. And it has come crashing down so fast, like just fascinatingly fast. So, look, I'm hoping that Caleb Williams is shopping for houses in Foxborough pretty soon, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Oh, get off the Patriots. Guys, stop doing this. Okay, injuries. Again, keep it going. Justin Fields, yeah, cool. More pain for me. We mentioned this already. Look, throwing hand injury, not exactly a timeline yet. He dislocated his thumb, but obviously there can be some extra stuff that comes along with that keeps him out for a little bit because he can't grip the ball properly. Tyson Bagent, who was the reliever for them.
Let's put it this way. When I put it on our show sheet, I put in Tanner Bagnet. That's just how I genuinely had no idea. Like, I could have probably named 31 of the 32 backup quarterbacks in the NFL. I have no idea who this kid is.
You want to know who he is, Pat? Because I looked him up because I was curious. Tyson Bagent went to Shepherd. D2.
That's D2,
school.
Yeah.
It's one of those guys that I'm like, I don't understand how you even found, like, how the NFL found you. Like, you went to Shepherd. How do you end up on an NFL roster, let alone an NFL roster as a primary backup? How does this happen? Like, this is Tim Boyle 2.0, but Tim Boyle at least stayed D1. Our boy who started at UConn and then went to one of the directional Kentuckys.
Eastern Kentucky.
And then
he went
Eastern
down to
Kentucky.
FCS.
Yeah, so he started D1 at least. Tyson Bagent, as far as I know, was at Shepherd for like 5 years and nowhere else. So it is a miracle that he ended up in the NFL, and now he is projected to be the Bears starter here for the next couple weeks. The fantasy play here is to target whatever defenses are facing the Bears. That's all I can really say.
You know who's playing the Bears this week, Brandon?
Who's that, Pat?
The Raiders. The Raiders have
Fuck
a chance
you.
to go. The Raiders have a chance to be 4-3 here. I think they're going to lose. I think the Bears are going to blow the Raiders' doors off. This has letdown written all over it. It happens every year. The Raiders beat Green Bay. Green Bay is not a juggernaut or anything, but good win. They beat the Patriots. You have to beat the Patriots. Sorry, the Patriots are miserable. You gotta.
Yeah.
And now they're going to go play the second worst team in the league and lose at home. Is my guess.
Tyson Bagent is about to toss 400 yards and 6 touchdowns against the Raiders and take the Bears' job.
Loss. It's going to be a really upsetting loss. But I think, again, kind of getting back to fantasy, he didn't look great. That offense did not look great.
No.
And I guess kind of mentioning that backfield there, I mean, it was Deontay Foreman with a little bit of Darrington Evans. I mean, I guess a little more Darrington Evans than we thought, but it was mostly Foreman. Looked okay when I think he only got like 9 carries or something for like 46 yards. So did a decent job with the touches, but again, just wasn't in a position to really get any kind of volume. We'll see about Roschon Johnson. If Roschon Johnson is out once again, I think with Bagent at quarterback against the Raiders, I think Deontay Foreman, I'm not going to say he's a must start, but like, especially with how, thin pickings with the buys and injuries, I think Deontay Foreman's a guy who should be starting, so long as Johnson's out again, which you don't see guys missing multiple weeks with a concussion these days, but.
Yeah, I mean, one week is usually a guaranteed miss when you have a concussion, and then after that, it seems like they generally start to return. I would be a little surprised if Roschon didn't play, but if he doesn't play, then yeah, Deontay Foreman is absolutely back on the menu. But otherwise, I mean, you kind of just got to downgrade the whole Bears offense. They're not going to move the ball as well with this dude from Shepherd leading the way. I mean, I guess shepherds are pretty good at leading, or is that sheep herders? Am I just mixing up words? That's what shepherd is, isn't it? That's what it means, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess leadership maybe is in his blood if that's the school he went to, or he's complete ass and the Bears are going to be brutal. Another quarterback injury, Pat, is one that I assume nobody in their right mind was starting this guy who got hurt, but it's Ryan Tannehill. Carted off with an ankle injury. Just bad to worse for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, Derrick Henry had a good game at least, but this offense and this team, it's just been kind of bad vibes all season. The bad vibes are going to continue. Ryan Tannehill, for all we know, I'm not even going to speculate on a timetable right now, but it's not looking good, and there's really no counter move to make except, again, starting the defense that faces the Titans.
Yeah, high ankle sprain, I believe. Yeah, it was the one he had surgically repaired over the offseason. They say he's not going to need surgery again, and especially with the fact that the Titans have Malik Willis, the fact that they have Will Levis, I would not be surprised if we don't see Ryan Tannehill again. If he misses multiple weeks. And I honestly think here, what do you have to lose in starting Will Levis right now is the way I see it. You took him, well, granted, he was a guy that was projected to go in the top 5. You took him in a similar spot to Willis. It's like, it seems like, Levis has the more upside than Willis here. Willis is really raw still. We'll see what he does. He looked terrible last year, but moral of the story, right, whether it's Willis, whether it's Levis, whether it's Ryan Tannehill, don't start anyone on this team not named Derrick Henry. DeAndre Hopkins has looked decent at times. Treylon Burks has been a non-factor. My boy Chig Okonkwo has done nothing. And, this is just an offense. And, again, like you said, there are going to be games based on game script where Derrick Henry does not look good. So, but Derrick Henry you got to start Derrick Henry. But besides that, one of the ugly, I'd put him right up there, basically with the Patriots, as the ugliest fantasy offenses. Really, just very limited assets.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Patriots, and then you've got a coaching staff off the Belichick tree, with that being Mike Vrabel and the Tennessee Titans, and both are just miserable watches right now. Yeah, as far as Willis and Levis are concerned, I imagine this is just a matter of, like you said, they were drafted in relatively similar spots. Levis was a second rounder, Willis was a third, and they're probably just trying to figure out what exactly they may or may not have in Willis. Not that they wouldn't already have an idea of that based on practices and based on last year, but maybe it's let him go for a few games and confirm your prior expectations that he's not the guy, and then we see Levis for the back 5 or 6 games of the season if Tannehill is truly done for the year. If Tannehill's done for the year, I would be surprised if we saw no Will Levis at all this year, just because you might as well.
Be bad too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's the harm? I mean, I don't think there's really any downside to it. Just see what you've got with him as far as him in an NFL game setting goes, and go from there, because you're probably going to have a chance at another quarterback in this upcoming class as well if you want one. I mean, maybe the record might not be that bad because there's just some really bad teams in the league, but there's also a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be in this class that are worth going after. So a lot of things to think about if you are the Tennessee Titans. Not a lot of things to think about if you are a fantasy manager trying to make decisions relating to the Titans, because the decision is avoid unless it's Derrick Henry. There's really nobody worth going after.
And then one other injury, not new to this week. It seems Anthony Richardson's going to have season-ending surgery.
Yes.
Pour one out. The kid looked great. The kid, everyone was like, oh, this guy's got crazy upside, but, a low floor. He was showing the crazy upside. He was really going to put the doubters to bed there, and it's just sad. It's just sad. Hopefully he comes out of this okay and is ready to go for year 2. But, yeah, that's more of just a bummer than news.
Yeah, we just don't want this to linger throughout his career. Hopefully this injury is one he can fully recover from, because, I mean, the guy is just electric city. Like, you watch him play, and it looks like prime Cam Newton out there. He's big, he's fast. It doesn't look like he should be able to put all those things together on an NFL field. So hopefully the shoulder injury is nothing too major outside of, knocking him out for the rest of this season. Some other waiver targets, although there's really not much to be excited about these days. We've got Jeff Wilson. So Jeff Wilson is an interesting case. Yeah. I honestly feel like if people were going to pick him up, it would have been last week, right? Because he got his practice window activated, and we thought he could be active for this past week, and that didn't end up happening. But with Jeff Wilson, it's now a little bit interesting with him. Obviously, the Dolphins have shown their ability to use 2 running backs, but could that second running back just be Salvon Ahmed? Mike McDaniel said about Jeff Wilson this past week that he was prepared enough to play, but the Dolphins needed to use that spot on O-lineman Robert Jones. So is this a case of hiding what is essentially a healthy scratch under what was already an IR designation? Like, why activate him if you were just going to scratch him anyway, obviously? So could this be a consistent theme if and when he does get actually activated?
Well, the thing is, obviously, if they don't take him off IR this week, then he basically just told on himself, saying, like, oh, he might have been able to play last week, but that would just be really surprising here, especially the fact that with Achane being out, like, you'd think you'd want a guy established like Wilson in there, who is, despite the age, despite injuries, whatever, has been a more successful running back in this league than Salvon Ahmed. But yeah, that really interesting from McDaniel that they felt that, like, hey, like, we just actively don't need Jeff Wilson this week to win, and he was correct. He's going to be correct most weeks in that assumption probably, but yeah, that's I don't really know. Obviously, you're starting Raheem Mostert, but the thing I just think is if Jeff Wilson is active, I do think he's a bigger threat to Mostert's volume and production than Ahmed.
Yeah, for sure. I think it speaks to, and maybe this is looking too deep into it, but sort of the mysterious nature of this Wilson injury. I mean, again, we brought it up time and time again on this show that when it happened, McDaniel sort of hinted at it, that it wasn't impossible that Wilson could have missed the entire year. Obviously, he doesn't expect that to be the case if he activated his window, where he now needs to activate him within the next 3 weeks. But it maybe speaks to this injury could be, affecting him a little bit more than we thought. Maybe Salvon Ahmed is passing the eye test better than Jeff Wilson is in practices, and this could be a case where Wilson is not a factor to the degree that we thought he would be this year. What I would say is with this Dolphins running back situation and how productive that backfield has been, make sure Savon Ahmed is owned, at least through this week. See how the backfield plays out, because if you're going to get Savon Ahmed as the 1B to Raheem Mostert's, I mean, I guess it's an A and B now with Mostert and Ahmed, but if you're going to get Savon as the backup, that's going to be a relevant role for as long as Devon Achane is out, if Wilson is going to end up being a non-factor. So interesting dart throw to take.
We've talked about Mostert's injury history as well. There's a situation where Ahmed could end up being the lead back there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ahmed is a decent running back in his own right, and if he could step into a larger role, then watch out. Okay, some other waiver targets here. We've got these young receivers, Pat, that have kind of just been on waivers for weeks, and people just wondering if they're going to truly break out into like must-own status. So you've got Rashee Rice, Josh Downs, and Michael Wilson. We'll start with Rashee Rice, who I think is my favorite of these three. I don't know about you. I know you're a big Michael Wilson guy, so I'm sure he's high up on your list. But Rashee Rice, my personal favorite out of these guys. This past week against the Broncos, 4 receptions for 72 yards on 4 targets. The key here with Rashee Rice, and the key to unlocking him, is the snap count. He is not playing he's not on the field a lot. 49% snaps in that game against the Broncos, despite the fact that for the last couple of weeks now, he has looked far and away like their best actual wide receiver. Obviously, Travis Kelce's his own thing.
Pass catcher for sure.
Yeah, he has looked awesome. He's looked like the only guy that's able to actually make plays on his own. I mean, Sky Moore, RIP. It's just not happening with Sky Moore. I'm over it with Sky Moore. It's not happening. MVS, we know what he is. It's just not going to happen.
Rashee Rice is what everyone thought Sky Moore was going to be, basically, or even Kadarius Toney as well. Like he is what those two could be in a similar archetype. You know, you could use the snaps as kind of like a downside on Rice. Like, I don't like that. He's only playing 50% of snaps. And it's like, yeah, don't start him. We're not telling you to start him.
Sure.
We're telling you to pick this guy up because I look at it more from the glass half full kind of thing where it's like, this guy's only got room to go up. You know,
that's why he's on our targets list, yeah.
Even if he's playing 70% of these snaps, he's going to see a lot more volume. He's going to see a lot more production. And like we just said, he's the best non-Travis Kelce pass catcher. And everyone's like, the Chiefs haven't used, wide receivers outside of Tyreek Hill. And it's like, yeah, because they really haven't had anybody, on that kind of level. And obviously, Rashee Rice is not on that level, but he's good enough where he can be a secondary focal point, I guess, if that's kind of an oxymoron, to Travis Kelce. But you said my boy is Michael Wilson. I love Josh Downs. There was a lot of talk about Josh Downs going into the season. He has clearly surpassed Alec Pierce on the depth chart. I mean, they're playing a similar amount of snaps, but Downs is seeing the targets, he's seeing the production. And another thing to like is that we just talked about Anthony Richardson being out. Josh Downs has now had 2 solid weeks in a row with Gardner Minshew under center. In the Colts aren't terrible, they're not great, but again, this team that could be losing a lot, could be throwing a lot. Out of these 3, if you have to start someone immediately, I'm starting Josh Downs because he already has the role. Michael Wilson also, the snaps are flying, but the Cardinals just still scare me. There's still a lot of guys. There's still Hollywood Brown. There's still Rondale Moore. There's still Zach Ertz. There's still Trey McBride. If James Conner comes back, like there's just a lot more. In Indy, it's like you got Michael Porter Jr. Did I say Michael Porter Jr.? Is that
Michael Porter Jr.?
Player's name?
That is the Denver Nugget.
Jesus, God! Someone take me out to pasture. Yep,
go Nuggets, baby.
Yeah, you're welcome for that. You're welcome for that opportunity. Michael Porter, what the fuck am I doing? But Michael Pittman, after Michael Pittman, there's not really a prominent tight end. I mean, the running backs get some work, but out of the 3, like I think Josh Downs has the most. They're going to spread the ball around less than the Cardinals and the Chiefs is basically what I'm saying in a roundabout way, which is why I prefer Downs. I think, Downs should be owned. If I go around look at my leagues and Josh Downs isn't owned, I'm picking him up. He's a guy that should be owned.
I totally agree. Josh Downs this past week, 5 catches, 21 yards, but 1 touchdown on 8 targets, 78% of the snaps, which, like you said, more than Alec Pierce at 74%. Meanwhile, Michael Wilson, 3 catches, 62 yards on 4 targets, 88% of snaps. So if you're looking for a guy who is an every down player, Michael Wilson's the closest thing you're going to get out of these guys. But yeah, Rashee Rice, there's a point where chasing upside is what you kind of should do. And I think when it comes to waiver targets, that's absolutely what you should do. Like Michael Wilson is a as of right now, obviously a higher floor player than Rashee Rice is, but Rashee Rice is a guy that if he keeps playing and making plays the way he has been and gets a full complement or relatively full complement of snaps at some point, this could be a weekly flex consideration, if not a wide receiver too, if they really unleash him. I mean, if he hits Michael Wilson's 88% snap share in that Chiefs offense, look out. And I think that their coaching staff is smart enough that he'll get there eventually. I don't know when it will be, and maybe it'll only be 80% because they like rotating their receivers. They've been doing it since last year, but as you pointed out, they probably haven't had a receiver as talented as him since Tyreek left. So the sky is really the limit, not to make a Sky Moore pun because it wasn't, but the sky's really the limit for Rashee Rice in this offense if his role continues to grow. Pat, a guy that is close to your heart, another final waiver target, tight end Michael Mayer.
This is the point where I don't need to tell the story, but I was watching a lot of this game on my phone on YouTube from a parking lot of a mobile in Boxborough, Massachusetts, not Foxborough, Boxborough. And there was one catch where I genuinely was like, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
Like I was genuinely like, I'm like who? I'm like that's not Hooper. And I'm like that's Mayer.
Yeah.
I'm like that's Mayer. It was like the guy didn't exist for the first couple weeks of the year, and they're finally starting to incorporate him a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I love it. I love it because, again, this Raiders team, obviously Devontae Adams is a volume hog, and it's clear that that Jimmy G or Brian Hoyer, whoever, love throwing to Jacoby Myers as well. But again,
Jacoby Myers, man, I miss him.
The third option there is wide open. It's not going to be Hunter Renfrow. Also, a big who now when he's on the field. That's more of a joke now where it's like, who's number 10? And it's not going to be Austin Hooper. It's not going to be anyone else. There's a real chance here. And again, it's such a desolate position. A lot of guys that we wanted to work out didn't work out. Dalton Kincaid, Chigakonkwo, Pat Freiermuth, a lot of guys that you probably drafted later wanting to be your tight end one. You're scrambling. Right now. And at the very least, Mayer is a guy that is probably only going to go up in terms of, again, similar to Rice. It's like the more he plays, the more he's going to do. And it's such a bad position. Why the hell not? But just as a Raider fan perspective, I love it. You used a reasonable pick on him. Use the guy. And I really hope that this continues.
Yeah, if you're needy at the tight end position, which at least half of the teams in any given league are, Michael Mayer is a must-add. I mean, the usage climbing like this, there's no reason to expect that it will go down. This is nowhere to go but the same or just even more up than it has been. This past week, 81% of snaps against the Patriots, 66% in week 5. So, I mean, we started to see this materialize a little bit in week 5. We just didn't know that it was the start of something greater. We thought maybe it was just a little fluky or we didn't, it wasn't fully on our radar. The weeks before that, he was not above 51% of the snaps in any of the first 4 weeks. And then he jumps to 66 and 81. It's obvious that this was a guy that is just needed to be worked in a little slower, whether the Raiders just felt that way or his performance warranted it or whatever it was. It doesn't matter.
Josh McDaniels is dumb
or
as
Josh McDaniels is a moron. Thank you for bringing up the most likely of the scenarios. Either way, he's here. I don't think he's going anywhere. And if you need a tight end, he's more than a viable option given what we've seen the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but hey, Brandon, you know who else had a good game at tight end this week?
Who's that?
Kyle Pitts. Is he going to be the warden this week? Like, how are you going to justify him being the warden this week?
No. So Kyle Pitts,
just didn't bust. He had a genuinely solid game.
This is one of those things where I wonder about my personal audience on various platforms because I'm like, does everyone listening know what the fuck you're talking about right now? Or are there people that genuinely only listen to the podcast and don't watch the skits I do?
Really
I have no idea.
What appeal do I have? They're here because they watch your content.
There's got to be a couple though. I'm sure skits just aren't for everyone. And we get, roughly 2,000 listens per episode. So, okay, just to explain in case, my series Busts Anonymous is a comedy skit where I highlight the fantasy football busts of every week. And because Kyle Pitts has been such a regular appearance, I don't know, person on that show, I gave him a job, basically. I said, I'm sick of addressing you as like this just bust every single week. So I made him the warden for fantasy jail, which fantasy jail is what I do to players who bust for 3 weeks in a row and yet are still considered startable, quote unquote, players like Najee Harris. So Kyle Pitts in this comedy skit made sure that Najee Harris didn't escape prison. The question being now, Kyle Pitts has put together 2 straight weeks of being good. Yeah, last week I said I gave him the week off because he earned it. I said he had a good game. This week, I'm going to mention it, but he's not going to be there again, largely also because Najee Harris was on bye last week, so there was no prisoner to keep in line, and Ramondre Stevenson, I guess, escaped jail because he was good enough. Kyle Pitts, man, he scored a touchdown on American soil. That's really all we can ask from this guy, and I'm not expecting it to be a consistent thing because it's the fucking Falcons, and Arthur Smith is still a football terrorist, but better signs for sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of it, too, is that they had to throw the ball a lot. In Arthur Smith's wet dreams is that they can run the ball literally 40 times. Right. Throw the ball like 10 times like they did last year. That's his ideal scenario. But, again, this team isn't really good enough to necessarily control the game flow. Like, if this was a better team, then you could say, like, yeah, then that's not going to happen. But I think the people that are saying that, like, oh, this isn't going to happen just because they're going to want to run the ball more, it's like, are they going to be in a position to do that? Like, they may be in positions where Kyle Pitts and Drake London are getting targeted regularly, are getting, are seeing the work because that's the kind of team they are. Like, they're going to have to be playing from behind against some of these better teams, and Washington, apparently. Like, what the fuck? Like, Washington has, I played Washington's defense against the Bears last week, and it screwed me. So now I played the Falcons' defense against the Commanders. I mean, they got 5. That's not awful, but, like, screwed me, basically. Like, not what I wanted it to be. But, again, you have to start Kyle Pitts if you have him after these 2 weeks. This guy wasn't even on our agenda. Somebody put it in the chat. And someone asked before, do we read chat? Yes.
Yes.
But Kyle Pitts... You have, again, like we talked about all the tight ends that we figured would be playable tight ends who are basically not. Or George Kittle, who either catches 3 touchdowns or has 1 catch for
Oh my God. Like, he has been useless outside of that one game.
After the 2 good weeks, you have to start Kyle Pitts again until you can't again. Until he, starts laying the stinkers again. But right now you've got to do it.
And again, it's probably time will tell, but I think Desmond Ritter's days are numbered. So this may only get better for Kyle Pitts if he gets Taylor Heineke in there, who can at least throw a good ball more than 15% of the time, I would say. There's a reason Taylor Heineke's not a starter anywhere else. He's not that good either, but almost everyone it might be better than Desmond Ridder. He's brutal, man. He's so bad. It feels like deja vu from last year where I was begging for them to bench Marcus Mariota because we were just watching him suck week after week. I was like, just do anything else so that we could see if Desmond Ridder is any better. Well, now we know Desmond Ridder's not any better. And I'm like, okay, I know you at least have a competent, like, game manager, stopgap quarterback on your bench. Put him in because it's not going to be any worse than Desmond Ridder. Yeah. This one I know actually won't be any worse.
They're a team that could realistically make the playoffs. Like, that division is not great. Like, they can very easily win that division and make the playoffs. So they need to do whatever's best for winning games, and it's probably not Desmond Ridder. I mean, right when you think like, oh, like this is it for Ridder, he kind of goes out there and looks okay, and they win the game or whatever. But yeah, his seat's got to be hot. But you just never know with Arthur Smith, and I love him. I love the guy. He's great for football.
I hate him so much.
Exactly.
He's the worst.
Exactly. He is, and that is fantastic. That is fantastic. All right, enough Kyle Pitts talk. We're going to talk now about some interesting, kind of gross backfield situations. I'll preface it with this. We already talked about Emari DeMercado's demise. The fact that, when the report came out, like, oh, Keontae Ingram is listed as a starter. People were like, oh, yeah, that was correct. But,
yep.
I didn't necessarily get to watch a lot of games this weekend. And I see a tweet where it's like, you have an undrafted rookie who looks good last week, and then you give 8 carries to a 31-year-old who's been out of the league for 2 years. And I'm like, that's not Keontae. I'm like, Keontae Ingram?
Yep.
Like, I genuinely did not know who they were talking about. Damian Williams?
Damian Williams, back from the dead.
Damian
that was...
Williams out here, drastically out-carrying and out-snapping DeMercado. I didn't know, I knew he's been out of the league. I didn't know he came back. I did not know that this guy was in the league. I was genuinely bamboozled when I went and looked at that box score to see what that tweet was talking about. Moral of the story here, if you got to start one of these guys, you're starting Keontae Ingram. But similar to a lot of these, we talked about the Rams and the 49ers, don't do it unless you have to. Yeah. You're dropping Amari DeMercado. I see all the notifications Amari DeMercado's been dropped from 8 billion Yahoo teams. And it's yes, join the trend. On Sleeper, he's going to be the top guy on that right column, and rightfully so. Get rid of him. But, again, ugly backfield. And, again, Josh Dobbs runs the ball well. So not a super high-volume backfield. They're giving James Conner high volume because he's an established solid running back. There's nobody who's an established solid running back right now. Maybe Damian Williams 6 years ago. But
oh, man.
But, yeah, just another backfield that you just really you really don't want to be a part of unless you have to. But, again, Keontae, too many vowels, Ingram, should at very least be, I guess, is a flex consideration this coming week here against
Seahawks.
Seahawks. I just looked to see, against the Seahawks.
Yeah, Keontae Ingram's a guy that I have on my roster, so I'm giving at least passing consideration to him over Latavius Murray for the RB2 spot. But again, that should tell you everything you need to know. Yeah, but it should tell you everything you need to know that it's an argument. I mean, look, this was the backfield breakdown for the Cardinals in terms of rush attempts. You had Joshua Dobbs with 7, Keontae Ingram with 10, Damian Williams with 8, Amari DeMercado with 2, and then Rondale Moore with 3. And a key for Rondale Moore, and I should have looked this up beforehand, but not only is Rondale Moore, did he rush for 3 times out of the backfield, I'm sure that on a lot of those passing downs, he's occupying the spot in the backfield that normally a running back could occupy. So, you've got 3 actual receivers lined up out wide, and then in a spot where, you'd love to have Ingram on the field to maybe slurp up one of those rogue targets or dump offs or something, he's not on the field because Rondale Moore is. So he's a guy that they like to align in the backfield so often that it further dampens just any value in this backfield. You are strictly hoping for a touchdown if you start anybody in this backfield because they are not going to volume their way to a good day unless they break a big run, which is the same thing as far as flukiness of scoring a touchdown. Yeah. You are just not... this is, Ingram, 10 carries for 40 yards, Williams, 8 for 36. It's going to keep being like this, I believe. And it's just, it's not going to be pretty.
Terrible efficiency, though, from either of them, too.
No, it's not. It's not. It's just, it's going to be split between the two. And I will say I was surprised by the absolute lack of DeMercado, at least in comparison to Williams, because it's if you like Williams that much, again, why did you not just have him on the roster instead of DeMercado?
Exactly.
It's very odd. I know DeMercado is a much younger player, so, see what you've got in him, whatever. And then maybe you're just underwhelmed, so you go get Damian Williams. But DeMercado was emerging even with Connor healthy. He was playing 30+% of snaps. So it was very strange to see an absolute cratering of his usage. But got to adjust.
Going back to Rondale Moore very quickly, to bring back another name from 2002, is Rondale Moore the new Dexter McCluster? Is he the new dual threat?
I think that's a little disrespectful to Dexter McCluster, if I'm being honest with you, based on
Dexter
what Rondale
McCluster's
Moore's
the only
done.
guy I can remember that had 2 designations, besides fucking Joe Webb, who was a starting quarterback in people's wide receiver slots, which was insane. But
I think DeAnthony Thomas did.
Oh, I think you're right.
Briefly.
I think you're right.
But Dexter McCluster was far more
McCluster
relevant.
Was actually on the fantasy radar.
Yes, he
Thomas was never really on the fantasy radar.
No, he was
Rondale Moore. You see that? I don't hate it. I don't hate the idea of them getting creative with him. That's the kind of player he is. That's when he's been at best. Is on some of these jet sweeps, some of these more creative plays to find him. But the Cardinals, despite the fact that they are clearly out there fighting, they look a lot better than we thought. They are still not very good. And and in that case, you don't necessarily want to touch that backfield.
No, I will say if Rondale Moore was eligible at running back, I would absolutely be considering him for this week, just given how much he is used as a receiver as well.
Yeah, of course.
That would be nice, but sadly, that is not the case. Okay, moving on to another backfield that has had a bit of a split here, but a much different sort of situation. We've got the Indianapolis Colts. Zach Moss this past week, 49% snap share compared to Jonathan Taylor's 43%. They eased Taylor back in. I mean, I'll be honest, Pat, I kind of expected a more drastic takeover from Taylor here this week. I figured it would get back to being more of a 60-40 at least, but no, we're sticking more of a closer to 50-50. In fact, with Zach Moss having more snaps than Taylor. But look, this was a good Jags run D. The game script was not good for the Colts, and that'll probably continue in a lot of games going forward, but at least the run defenses probably won't be quite as stout as the Jags in every game. But as you noted here, both were very involved in the pass game. Pat, how are you viewing this backfield now that we are 2 weeks in to both Taylor and Moss being active?
I still stand by the fact that I do think this will be Jonathan Taylor's backfield. I am just surprised at the fact that this might be a 3 or 4 week process to get there. And, you were kind of more in on this notion than me last week about that Zach Moss is not going to go away. And he's not going to go away. But I was, who was I listening? I was listening to the Fantasy Flock, and it was just that, like, the Colts have 42 million reasons to give Jonathan Taylor the football. And, if Zach Moss is going to be effective, you have packages for Zach Moss. You can do, you can have that. But Jonathan Taylor's just too talented. They've committed to him. Why wouldn't they use him? And now I finally, with the David Montgomery injury, I have to kick the tires on him. I have to start Jonathan Taylor this week. I have no, unless I start fucking Gus Edwards, but I am finally going to kick the tires on Jonathan Taylor here, and I'd like to think that he's kind of going to get more work, but even if they can get into a space where, it's still kind of a 50-50, but they're both, at least Taylor's a talented enough player to still be effective with that kind of workload, but you would like to see it get to more of a 60-40, ideally even like a 70-30 sooner or later.
Yeah.
I'm not panicking yet, but if we come back here this time next week with similar snap counts and usage splits like this, I may be singing a different tune. I may be a little worried.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Zach Moss continues to look good. And it's like, even though you've paid Jonathan Taylor that money, how do you get him off the field to a level where you're happy as a Taylor owner? Like, you want to see Taylor get, like you said, 70-30 snaps, but I don't know. My gut tells me that's still going to happen, especially with an owner like Jim Irsay, who just went through this whole debacle with Jonathan Taylor, reached a resolution. He's probably going to get involved if he needs to and not just sit there and be like, where's my guy that I just gave all that money to? So eventually I think he would step in if it got to that point. I don't think it will. I think Jonathan Taylor will continue to take over. If anything, this could be an opportunity to buy low from the Jonathan Taylor owner. I know I'm not going to be able to do that to you, Pat, but if it was anyone else, I would probably try and kick the tires on that because, they might be panicking a little bit like, this is not the Taylor that I held for 4 weeks and wanted to see.
And another thing, too, is that obviously no Anthony Richardson is, again, Richardson wasn't going to take a ton of goal line work, but he was still going to take some. And, like you said, touchdowns are king, especially for dinosaurs like us still playing in standard non-PPR scoring. But in that other situation now, that could help Jonathan Taylor. But I'm hoping this week I at least come back next week and am a little more optimistic. I'm not expecting it to be like, this is the Jonathan Taylor game, like the Breece Hall game, for example, a couple weeks ago. Like, I don't necessarily know if it's going to be take the training wheels off kind of deal, but I think we'll be in a position where you're going to be like, okay, like he's starting to take over this backfield.
I will say this is kind of a perfect way to transition to our next backfield, which is the Texans, because you mentioned non-PPR and PPR.
What the fuck happened in that Texans game?
I don't know, but I did see a very funny tweet of 2 videos that it was like just 2 dudes scoring 0.8 PPR points, and it was Dameon Pierce dragging basically the entire defense with him for 8 yards. Like, it was just a beast of a carry. And then it was Robert Woods catching a ball behind the line of scrimmage for a 2-yard loss. And I was like, that shows the flaws of PPR, and it just makes me laugh, where it's like one play was so great and the other one is an actual negative, but because he caught the ball, it was something. Just a funny way to transition into here. But yes, the Texans backfield is what we're talking about here, because Dameon Pierce got out-snapped pretty significantly here by Devin Singletary. And maybe we should have seen it coming because Devin Singletary's been more efficient than Dameon Pierce, but I am still surprised.
Singletary didn't have a touch in week 5. I faced the team that started him, and I still lost. But he had no touches. 0 carries, 0 yards, 0 catches, everything. Nothing.
Yeah.
To go from 0... Like they say, like, I'm going from 0 to 100. He went from 0 to 100 with no warning whatsoever. And granted, Dameon Pierce, has been pretty bad. Like, we kind of, over the preseason, we were kind of like, yep, we're out on Pierce, yada, yada, yada. But then, maybe we've kind of been underselling him. No, we were right. We were right at the beginning.
Yeah.
We were right at the beginning. And just the fact that, again, the Texans still aren't great. They're still kind of going to be losing. But also just the fact that with how good C.J. Stroud has looked and how good, guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell have looked, they're just a much better passing team than running team.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that's going to hurt Dameon Pierce, even if he continues to be the starter in this offense, is he may not get the volume. And last year, his production hinged on his volume. And again, I don't own any Dameon Pierce or Devin Singletary, but stop me if you've heard this before. I am starting neither unless I have to.
Stop. I've heard that before. No, I agree with you, though. I agree with you, though. Dameon Pierce is a guy that's probably going to remain involved, at least in goal line situations. It's just how often are those going to come by that you feel good about starting him on a week-to-week basis?
He'll still be involved. Like, I still think he'll be the starter, but it's just, is he going to get the valuable enough work to be a guy that, like, you're starting Dameon Pierce being like, yup, Dameon Pierce is my RB2. I'm setting it and forgetting it. Like, no, he's not that guy anymore.
No, and I think Singletary becomes an interesting pickup if he is available in your league, just to see where it goes. Because if he remains this involved, you got a viable flex. Or even, again, Singletary's a guy, if he was available, Pat, that would be my... Oh, no, he's on bye too. Never mind. He would not be my RB2 this week. In a similar situation, he would be my RB2 if I was down bad like this.
He's also owned, by the way.
Yeah, I know he is. He's owned and he's on bye, so the reference doesn't really work. But the theory stands. Devin Singletary going to remain
if Pierce
involved.
Gets hurt, too. It's clear that they'll give Singletary that workload.
Absolutely. Moving on here to the Browns backfield, we've got Jerome Ford and the resurgence of Kareem Hunt. So Jerome Ford still played more than Hunt did, 50% of snaps for Ford, 37% for Kareem Hunt. But Kareem Hunt, the stock is going up. I believe, these seem like a lot of carries for these guys. They ran the ball this fucking much. 17 carries for 84 yards for Ford versus 12 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown for Kareem Hunt. So Hunt, a little bit more, not productive. I guess he kind of just got the touchdown, right? I mean, otherwise, it's just he's going to potentially be more involved than we thought he would be when we thought maybe he was just dust. We weren't sure.
Yeah, and I guess out of all the backfields, I guess I would most confidently say, like, hey, like, Jerome Ford is the starter. You can start Jerome Ford. Because, again, it was good to see him have almost, 5 yards of carry. But the other thing, too, is the fact that, Kareem Hunt's getting 3 catches for 24 yards. That's another significant thing. That's always been the appeal with Kareem Hunt. And I think he's, at the end of the day, he's still going to be more of the third down back than anything. And Ford will still be kind of the 1A, the starter on this offense. And if I have to start any of these guys we've talked about that are in timeshares, I'm starting Jerome Ford. And, I still think he's going to outsnap him. I don't think that's, a surprising thing. I think that's going to keep happening. And, again, the Browns defense is just so good that it's at the very least put them in a position to stay in the game. Because
positive game script against the Niners. Positive game script. Who would have thought?
Like, I saw something where the Browns are, like, set to be the best defense in, like, the last 53 years, statistically.
Crazy.
So, especially their run. I mean, their run defense is so stout. That line is just chock full of just literal monsters, very scary people. Yeah. Hello, Mason Rudolph. Whoops.
Oh, no.
But
he's shaking
assault.
In his boots. He felt a disturbance.
Assault.
Okay, Schefter.
But yeah, again, Kareem Hunt is not necessarily a guy who is you're not going to start him. Honestly, like, if I look on my waiver wire and see Kareem Hunt is available, I'm not going to jump to pick him up. I'm just not going to do it. Because, again, he didn't look fantastic on the ground. 3 yards a carry, basically. He didn't look great, and I don't think that's what he's there to do. So I guess in a deep PPR league, sure. But outside of that, Kareem Hunt's a guy that I'm more comfortable leaving on waivers and saying, like, hey, like, Jerome Ford is more so going to be the guy than anything.
Kareem Hunt has a pulse, at least, which was something we were sort of unsure of coming into this week, at least in terms of borderline fantasy relevance. Look, my brain is just poisoned about running backs. I'm at a point where I want to snag any guy that even sniffs double-digit touches as a running back, and Kareem Hunt has fit firmly into that category now, so I would pick him up if I could. But, Pat, in our league, stop me if you've heard this before, he's owned. Stop me if you've heard this before, you may not have, because this doesn't apply to all the running backs. He's been owned since draft day.
He was drafted. Cormiers held him for however long, and his team's good, too, like.
I know. He held free agent Kareem Hunt for weeks, and then he got signed, and now he's reaping the mediocre rewards of having Kareem Hunt. So good for him, I guess. But that's the Browns' backfield for you. Ed, finally, the Panthers' backfield. This is an interesting one because Miles Sanders out this past week. Chuba Hubbard looked pretty good again, and it makes you wonder. I mean, look, Miles Sanders is getting paid a pretty little penny there to be in Carolina, but if he's going to continue to be banged up like all year, like it seems like he's going to be, could Chuba Hubbard become a weekly starter for your fantasy team, that is? I feel like there is a world where that is the case. Chuba Hubbard has been the more impressive looking runner, and sometimes, look, some seasons are just a wash because of nagging injuries, and it seems like that could be the case for Miles Sanders this year.
Yeah, and I mean, Miles Sanders was one of the guys that all these, the fantasy people in the preseason were talking about, like, who's about to hit their peak and fall down. And Miles Sanders was one of those guys that was prominently talked about. And he hasn't looked great, and it's probably partially because of the injury. And again, in a situation like, do you want to keep him out there when he's not right? Like, how effective is he going to be? And we even saw Hubbard granted in some opportunities last year post Christian McCaffrey, and he's looked pretty good. The only thing that kind of surprised me is like his lack of involvement in the passing game this week, as well as the week before. Like, that was kind of his thing. Like, even with Sanders, he was pretty involved on passing downs, and like obviously he was involved on passing downs, but didn't really get the work. I think he had one catch this passing. Let's see. Yeah, one catch for 2 yards on. And that was his only target. So, again, I think, if anything, if Chuba Hubbard's out there as the starter again this coming week, I didn't say it about Devontae Freeman, but if you have Chuba Hubbard, you have to start him, unless your team is really, really good. But, I'm assuming that everyone is sitting here crying into their pillow every night because they don't have any running backs like Brandon over there. But
it's tough out here, man.
Sounds like you want Gus Edwards. We'll be in talks. Let's do it. Let's make a trade live on the pod involving Gus Edwards.
Gus Edwards, man, that is just the least appealing player I could think of to trade for ever.
I did it.
I mean, I know you did it. Just with Justice Hill existing and Keaton Mitchell lurking in the shadows,
Keaton Mitchell doesn't exist. Man was active and didn't do a thing.
Not yet. I mean, he was on IR. I'm not expecting anything yet. Maybe he's just new Zach Evans.
And Keaton Mitchell is a small boy, SMOL. So it's like,
true.
I think if anything, I'm not worried about Mitchell for Gus Edwards. I'm worried about Mitchell more for Justice Hill in terms of a third down role. But yeah, gross. Went off topic here. But yeah, again, if you're crying into a lean cuisine every night about your running back situation and you have Chuba Hubbard, you at least feel decent. You at least feel decent to good about starting him so long as Miles Sanders misses this week again.
Absolutely. All right, let's finish things off with our viewer questions.
We just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
The first one was kind of mean. No.
A little. I mean, look, I understand. I got to cop to my takes when they're wrong. Can we revisit your preseason Jahan Dotson take? He should be deported to Trash Canistan. This question from David Lambo. First of all, hilarious approach to asking this question.
Trash Canistan. I love it.
Trash Canistan is very funny. Yeah, look, as far as Jahan Dotson is concerned, I have no fucking clue what's going on because it seems like basically every Commander's wide receiver and even tight end is being prioritized and playing better than Jahan Dotson because Jahan Dotson, I saw, had a brutal drop on his only target this week.
Yep. Not a good look. Not a good look when you're struggling for targets.
No, not a good look at all. And it's just been very confusing because of how good the preseason was. And I know preseason's not everything. Obviously, guys shine in preseason and then disappear all the time. But it's different when this is a relatively high drafted rookie, that last year rookie who played really well down the stretch, and then now is just disappearing. Like I believe the take he might be referring to is that I don't think I outright said it, but I said I could see him taking over as the Commanders wide receiver 1 over Terry McLaurin.
We were both very high on Jahan Dotson.
Yeah,
I know I was.
Pat, I don't know if you remember this in our draft. I picked Jahan Dotson over Terry McLaurin. They were both available, and I took Jahan Dotson. Terry McLaurin was one of the players in our draft that was sliding for just obscene reasons, and Terry McLaurin had recently, I want to say a couple days before our draft, suffered an injury.
He had the turf toe issue, I believe.
Yes, that's what it was. It was turf toe. So I took Dotson thinking, okay, maybe this lingers for McLaurin, but even if it doesn't, Dotson's been really, really good this preseason and seems like there's a connection with Sam Howell, and man, whiff.
And Dotson looked great at the end of the year last year too.
Right.
Only one game was with Sam Howell. We're in a new offense with Eric Bieniemy at the helm. But like, he's like, he makes Curtis Samuel look like Jerry Rice out there. He's been
a non-factor.
Obviously, Terry, Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas has had his weeks. Brian Robinson. This was another. I'm not going to necessarily do a victory lap, but I talked about how Brian Robinson was being overlooked as a pass catcher, and Brian Robinson has really added to some of his value in some of these lesser rushing games. With catching 3 or 4 passes a game, and then obviously Antonio Gibson as well. I believe had a receiving touchdown this past week, but
yep.
People kind of talked about it was like be patient on Jahan Dotson, send him to Trash Canistan. He is, except the Dynasty League. The only league I own Jahan Dotson in is a Dynasty League. I'm not dropping him. But if you are in a redraft league with a short bench, you can very, very easily drop Jahan Dotson. But again, part of me is like, don't be surprised if at the end of the year he's one of those guys that kind of pops off and helps teams, get to championship games. Because Ron Rivera was still speaking highly of him. He's like, there are better games ahead, a lot of room to improve. Like, do you think that's going to happen with Jahan Dotson? But I think he was out of all these darlings in the preseason, kind of like the breakout candidates. Mm-hmm. The one has just been the biggest flop for just the fantasy football community as a whole. I think there were a lot of people high on Jahan Dotson. And, the other thing, I was talking about, good at real life football, bad at fantasy. I think Terry McLaurin is the poster child of that, because Terry is just obviously he has his weeks, but he's just never been a consistent set it and forget it wide receiver. But the dude is just so talented and so fun to watch. But going into the year, I had zero interest in drafting Terry at all, and
obviously same, yeah.
And that seems to kind of have been, not necessarily right on. Again, he's had his good weeks, but. Basically my hypothesis is right. But yeah, again, that Washington offense is just really hard to read, because some games they're dropping 50. Other games they're getting sent to Trash Canistan by the fucking Chicago Bears. So you don't know what you're going to get there. But yes, David, thank you for keeping us honest. I just went and looked at the chat because I saw David was here. Dotson better stash than JSN? Ooh. In Dynasty, no. Of course, JSN is one of the top priorities, but ooh, wow. I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say JSN. I'd rather have JSN than Dotson.
I think I agree.
Again, I guess Dotson has more of a path to playing time, because if he just starts playing better and getting more involved, and we talked about last week, JSN would need an injury. But again, if JSN does get that path of playing time, if something happens to Metcalf or Lockett, JSN's a guy you're going to be starting every week. This is a Washington offense with a lot of cooks in the kitchen, nobody really standing out. Yeah, even in redraft, I'd rather stash JSN. Yeah, for sure.
That's the thing. You look at it this way, right? Dotson's the one with the playing time, but he's not doing shit with it. So it's what are you waiting for with Jahan Dotson? You're waiting for just a seismic shift in his ability to produce, even in the same, obviously you need more targets to come his way, but he's not doing well with the targets he is getting. So I don't know what the path is for Jahan. The path for JSN is clear. It's just, will it materialize this year? It may not even happen this year. So, look, I'm a perfect person to ask this to. I drafted both of these guys. I dropped both of these guys. I'm stashing neither of these guys, because I think there are just better bets out there and better depth pieces you can get with clearer short-term paths to potential production than either of these guys. You don't know where the finish line is for either of these dudes to be finding your lineup. Yeah, JSN I would pick, but I don't feel very good about either of them. And
Yeah,
Jahan, you
that's
make me
fair.
sad. Jahan, you make me sad, quite simply.
Taking
Okay,
our
next.
L trip on Jahan. We're in our L taking era with Jahan Dotson.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you. Guys, keep us honest. Go back and watch old episodes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna start doing that. I'm gonna start listening to episodes from the preseason and just pampering
God.
us with listener questions from my burners.
I hope you find some good takes in there as well among all the garbage. Hopefully, we could find some things to victory lap
I've
a
got
little
some
bit.
time on I'm gonna have some time on my hands in the coming weeks here. Maybe I'll just go through the archives.
Find the show where I said Devon Achane was going to be the best running back in football, but then get hurt. Because I knew
I'll
that.
let
I
you know.
predicted that. Yeah, I predicted that. You got to dig through the archives to find it. Okay, next question. I turned down this trade. I give Tyreek Hill and I get Justin Jefferson and Jalen Hurts. Was I wrong? This question from Captain Wunsch. Yeah, a lot to unpack here. So give Tyreek Hill, get Jefferson and Hurts. Was I wrong? I don't think you were wrong. We've talked last week about how Jefferson could very feasibly not return this year, given the state of the injury, the state of the Vikings, and the state of his contract. And Jalen Hurts, I mean, he hasn't been the elite quarterback you want him to be.
He hasn't been Jalen Hurts.
He hasn't been Jalen Hurts. Look, he's still solid. Like, even in this game with 3 interceptions that he had against the Jets in that horrific loss, he still managed over 19 fantasy points because that's just how he can rack up points, both with his legs and with the touchdowns that he's still going to get. But he's not like this game-breaking player. And I don't think I would send Tyreek Hill, who's been a top 5 player in all of fantasy football thus far, for a guy with no clear return timetable and a quarterback who's still a top 3 option at the position, but I don't know, unless you really had an awful quarterback, I wouldn't consider that. Like, I think if you have an even replacement level quarterback, no. And even if you don't, still probably no.
Yeah, I guess going on Tyreek Hill, I think outside of quarterbacks, like, you can make an argument. You're probably not going to say it, but I think you could argue that he's been the top 1. I mean, you're probably going to go Christian McCaffrey over him. You're talking, and then it's him and Raheem Mostert probably, but at least wide receiver. I mean, I think the main fact is why you're not wrong to do it is just that Hill has just been so good. Like, my goodness. And he had one down week where he had like 70 yards. He had like 7 catches for 70 yards, which isn't terrible. You know, you're still getting 14-ish points there. But the dude has just been so good by far and away. You know, the best, the most consistent wide receiver in an offense where you know that they are going to be high-flying. And, again, they run through him. You know, we said be patient on Jalen Waddle. That seems like that's kind of coming into fruition as well. He's looked good. But that offense lives, breathes, dies, whatever by Tyreek Hill. So I do not blame you at all. Someone like I'm a Tyreek Hill owner in a couple leagues, and you would have to absolutely blow my doors off to get him. I wouldn't do it right now. If somebody came up to me and offered me Jalen Hurts and Justin Jefferson for Tyreek Hill, I would not do it.
I mean, Tyreek Hill is on pace for 2,306 receiving yards.
Yeah, the dude's like, what I saw, like 180 yards away, or like 160 yards away from 1,000.
1,000, and we're in week 6.
He's going to get there by week 8. He's going to get there by week 8. That's insane. That is insane. And he gets the touchdowns, too, as well. That, you know, it's not only the fact that he gets volume, he gets the big plays. He's a matchup. No, I love Tyreek Hill. Whether I was a fantasy owner, whether he was my first-round pick or not, that man is just so much fun to watch.
Back in my day, Tyreek Hill was inconsistent on the Chiefs. Remember those days where he was just like a boom bust? He was still a top receiver, but he was just boom bust on the Chiefs. And now it's like, okay, the bust is going to be very, very few and far between for Tyreek Hill. He's either dropping 150-plus yards on you or he's scoring a touchdown or both. Honestly, more often than not, it seems to be both. So no, you are not wrong to decline that trade. And last question, not even really a fantasy question, just a funny one that I kind of wanted to touch on because I wasn't expecting it. This question from Jack D. Cal 412. He says, would you rather have the best D-line and the worst O-line or vice versa? Pat, I feel like this is pretty easy. You want the best O-line, right?
I thought I didn't say it was like really easy, but that is what I came out to as well. I think.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, you go.
If you have the worst O-line, your offense can't do shit. Like, I don't care who your quarterback is. I don't
Giants.
care. Hello, Patriots as well. I've watched this occur. Like the offensive line, your quarterback just has pressure. It doesn't matter what talent you have around your quarterback or on your offense. If they have no time to get open, your quarterback has no time to make progressions. Like yes, having the worst D-line in the league will suck and you'll probably get gashed by the run, but let's dive into this hypothetical here. You didn't say I couldn't have good linebackers and a good secondary. Like, at least you've got somebody in the second and third level to potentially stop that from happening. But yeah, if you have a terrible O-line, you don't got a shot. If you've got a terrible D-line, you at least have a shot.
And the other thing I was thinking too about when you have a good O-line is that if you can, obviously, assuming you have a good O-line and a good scheme, you're going to run the ball really, really well. And when you run the ball well, you're controlling the tempo of the game. If you just keep running the ball, your defense may not even be out there very much. If you can dominate time of possession, and when you've got a great O-line, that's probably what you're going to do, because either your quarterback's going to have a ton of time to pass or you're running the ball really well. So as good as a D-line, as a D-line is, at the end of the day, it's like, if your O-line stinks and your defense is out there 3/4 of the game, you're going to start getting gashed at some point.
Yeah, no, O-line is probably the most, I don't want to say underrated, because anybody who knows what they're talking about with football knows how vital the O-line is. But for like newer football fans or younger football fans, you only understand more and more as you get older how important that O-line is. Like, I think back to when fans booed the Cowboys for drafting, I think it was Zach Martin, or maybe it was it Zach or Travis Frederick?
I think it was Travis Frederick.
Travis Frederick.
30th overall. I was like, what are they doing? And the dude was great. I mean, retired a little early, but dude is great.
Right, can't predict that.
There are so many Hall of Fame linemen in the league right now that get absolutely no love. I mean, everyone loves Jason Kelsey because he's such a likable guy and stuff, but there are a lot of really, really good tackles who we're going to see in Canton someday.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's almost kind of like looking back. Like, obviously you got like Joe Thomas, for example. Like, that dude was incredible. An incredible left tackle. And it's huge. It's huge. If your quarterback's getting his shit rocked every 3 plays,
can't have it.
Not going to be good. Not going to be good.
Can't have it. Most important position group in football is the O-line. So that is why I would want. I mean, say quarterback if you want, but again, the quarterback becomes useless. A good O-line can turn a mid quarterback into a damn productive quarterback. Hello, Brock Purdy. Sorry, I don't mean that. He's I don't mean that. I do think, because I mean, honestly, the Niners O-line isn't actually one of the top ones in the NFL. I'm trying to think of a quarterback that's been enhanced greatly.
Like that and then sign off.
I'm trying to think of. No, I didn't actually mean that one, because I do think Brock is especially a lot better than like Jimmy G is, and the Niners O-line is really just Trent Williams and friends. Hey, no, we're not doing the Jimmy G argument right now. He's
Raiders O-line is terrible.
Bottom 5. But yeah, no, a good O-line can make a quarterback. A quarterback cannot fix the line. So that's where we're at with that. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Off the Bench. Hopefully it was a fun listen for you. Hopefully we help your fantasy teams and get you some nice little waiver targets to wake up to. But
hopefully I can help mine.
Yeah, probably not. Okay, that'll do it for this episode of Off the Bench. For Pat Gustafson, I am Brandon Carney. We'll see you guys next week.